Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Technology Management Distinguished Speaker Series event. And so today we are fortunate to have a number of special speakers. The advertisement, the flyer only listed Brent, but we are very fortunate today to have two additional speakers. Our first, Rand Heinrichs, is a cybersecurity consultant for PSU working on smart grid and cooperative learning. He retired as an eScience executive business manager in advanced strategies and policy under the chief technology officer. And while at Microsoft, Rand formed the Trustworthy Computing Initiative. Rand is a lead instructor for the National Center for Academic Excellence in Cybersecurity Risk Management at the University of Washington also. And Dr. Barbara Endicott-Popovsky is Associate Director for Education at the PSU Cybersecurity Center. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Rand Heinrichs. So thank you. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Tim for this wonderful opportunity to come and speak to you today and introduce you to my fellow Microsoft colleague. Brent has been in Seattle just for about a year now. He has been in Michigan working on his degree. Well, he's got work experience, but he got his degree in computer engineering on the EE side. So he's one of those hardcore cybersecurity specialists who know that the pedal to the metal. He spent some time in the Air Force where he was engaged in probably the most important activity in cybersecurity right now, which is incident responses, where you do risk assessments on your organization to find out where the threats and the vulnerabilities are. And he was working on weapons systems when he was doing that. He worked as a defense contractor, so he's got his foot in academia, in government, and in industry, where he was working on rendering and simulating and compliance and development. So he's run the whole scope of the cybersecurity system. At Microsoft, he's a security tech specialist working in Microsoft Federal. And he is also from origin from the Mapuche tribe in Chile. And I'm happy to introduce him now and have him take over and talk to you about cybersecurity.
Well, thank you so much, Rand. Let me see if I can share my screen. Can everybody see this? Does it look normal?
Not yet. Switching, now have the people. And it says you're going to start screen sharing, and there it is.
Awesome. Well, I can get this to advance. There we go. So today, I wanted to be kind of a conversational setting. There's a lot of information here, and I don't want to get too deep on anything that people aren't interested in. But the main focus for me is that we're going to start with talking about the current landscape of threats in cyber, and then move on to maybe a little bit of storytelling around incidents that we've seen. And I've got a couple from Native American nations in the US because I work personally with our tribal accounts and also some other federal accounts as a technical specialist. So I've got a little bit of stories to bring. Some of the stuff that we've published, as you know, Microsoft has done a study with one of the organizations, and then another one where we can't really disclose much, but I am able to talk about, you know, what it means for all of us and kind of how we react to incidents like that. And then talking about zero trust. And, you know, it's a big buzzword. A lot of people like to talk about how they'll solve zero trust for you. But if I'm going to pull the Microsoft hat off, I just want to talk about this, you know, from a security perspective. How do we do zero trust, you know, regardless of platform or anything else? What does it mean so that we're not continuing the whole buzzword trend, if you will. So first off, diving into the Microsoft Digital Defense Report for 2022. If you want to read more into this, the link is in this slide, but I think, Tim, you're going to be distributing both this and several other security reports, annual reports from other companies. I highly encourage everybody to look through and dig through it. Some really great intel in there, and learning. But for the Microsoft report, we have a large number of contributors. And one thing that I think a lot of people ask up front about Microsoft Threat Intelligence, and if you're not familiar, we do have our own intelligence organization internal to Microsoft, where we study cyber threats and publish reports and create threat intelligence. But the reason why we're able to do that and act confidently in that is that we have a very large network that we're dealing with. So the Xbox network is the largest private network in existence. We get 43 trillion signals a day, security signals, that we're able to analyze and use AI to break down and really create some trends out of. We're blocking billions of email threats, identity threats, and also endpoints. We're covering the whole gamut. So when we're looking at threat actors, we can see them, stick the toe in the water and then try to go low and slow and then try to create an effect. We can see that whole chain happening. So that's how we're getting this insight. So one of the big things that we've been seeing is that cybercrime is really evolving. We've got attackers getting much more sophisticated. They're using like weapons that are not as straightforward and are more likely to be using social engineering that's very well targeted. And they're going to be targeting the nation states and sovereign tribal nations, specifically around weak infrastructure like hospitals, schools, places that are less likely to be protected. And that's all happening with a combination of nation state and cyber criminals, sometimes together, where nation states are using cyber criminals that exist in their own country in order to exploit. So a big mixed bag of threats here. And if I highly recommend, if you're interested in this and you want to learn more, dig more into the report. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. But one of the things that we're seeing because of this real market behind cybercrime is the fact that we're getting cybercrime as a service. So we're having full companies, essentially like black market companies, stood up with like very real infrastructure that allow the end user to have a much lower skill but still deliver incredible attacks, because the platforms are really solid. They have the ability to create good pivot points from which to attack from. So highly resourced and well planned out. These are not just kids in somebody's basement. You can hire phishing as a service, which is just kind of mind blowing. But moving to the next one, the ransomware economy has been changing, and similar to the phishing piece here, we're seeing an incredible amount of players in the space who are using ransomware to attack very efficiently and are gaining significant amounts of money. It's a very repeatable business plan for people who are using ransomware. So that's why insurance companies are requiring zero trust controls to be put in place, because they're having to deal with litigating against paying out for all the attacks that are happening. And in my previous position, like we couldn't get cybersecurity insurance without having our stack ready to go. We had like a whole set of questions we had to answer. And if you're already currently enrolled, or if you move on after you do this part of your degree into a role where you're making decisions like this, you will see that come up from insurance companies, and at some level you'll be held accountable to reporting back, you know, what your controls are and how you're mitigating against ransomware. As far as sectors go, I don't think it's super surprising that these are the ones getting hit, but I think it's really interesting that there are still a lot of players in these sectors that are not putting controls like MFA or things that are really low barrier entry kind of controls in place so that they're protected against a lot of these ransomware attacks. And manufacturing is a big place where a lot of us IT folks end up being in at one point or another. So seeing that much of the pie chart is disconcerting for sure. And so I'm sure there's people in here who have their own war stories that they could tell about being in these different sectors and seeing attacks come through. So I would, as you're moving forward into these sectors, keep in mind, you know, sort of the red tape that comes along with change and what we can do in order to work with that and not against it to create a more secure infrastructure from the inside of these companies. All right. I don't think we have enough time to dig too much into this, but I do want to touch on this. So the speed at which attacks are happening is pretty incredible. So not only are we having to respond to attacks that are happening in the cloud that are measured in seconds and minutes versus, you know, previous ones where it's like hours and hours or days or weeks that are things are happening. But our vulnerability exploitation window is very crunched. Things are happening very quickly, and like 14 days of exploitation in the wild before proof of concept is released is like, that's a pretty significant amount of time. And so understanding that we can't just wait for a virus scanner definition to be updated is really important. We need to have a really holistic way of looking at how we're securing our data, because it's going to be really important once we look at, you know, the timeline of an attack like this. And I'm going to keep moving so that we don't run out of time. Okay, so I talked earlier about some examples. I have two stories. This first one, I can't talk about who it was, but I have a couple of details that I can share. So there was a tribal account that we work with, and they had a small tenant with 32 users, and it was taken over by an external admin. They didn't have MFA in place, and I know this is on my next slide, but I'm just trying to be brief about it. They didn't have MFA in place, so when the person was able to get in, they created some accounts. There were emails sent to their other admins, and nobody paid attention to the email about, oh, you created a new admin. And so they had all the tools in place to catch this, but they didn't actually have anything rolled out. But because they had this tenant and it was allowed to be taken over by somebody else, they were able to spin up over 1,000 subscriptions and provision over 100,000 virtual CPUs. And in under 24 hours, they spent $1.5 million. And that, like, luckily for them, you know, we did not end up charging them that amount. You know, there's other things that happened in there. But the important part being here that this wasn't like a major environment for them, right? This wasn't like they weren't running like their entire infrastructure out of it. They just had this account sitting out there, and they hadn't rolled out everything yet. And somebody took advantage of it. So how it was able to occur, I know I mentioned they didn't have MFA enabled, email was ignored, and even though they had all of our security tools purchased, they weren't deployed. And they also, because they didn't have Premier support when they were going to address it in the back end, the response was a little bit slower. So kind of rolling out of that, my big takeaway that I want to throw down here is make sure MFA is one of the first things you go after when you're starting out. Like I can't stress it enough. If you're setting up any environment, just put MFA on there. It's not very difficult, right? Given the tools that we have right now, where we're at in history. So this next one is actually full disclosure. You can read the full story at this link on the page. But Jeremy Brown came on and did a talk with me and several other people on this using the same slide deck, where he went through and explained the whole attack of the day experience. But essentially, they were hit by a horrible attack where they lost control of like all of their assets. There were only a handful of items that was still stayed up, but they lost their 911 for the tribe, and you know there's no way to know what history would have been like. But while that happened, somebody did have a 911 incident and did die. So the repercussions from this attack are not just the ransom dollars paid or potential files lost, but also possibly life loss. But essentially, there was an inside actor who was disgruntled and gave control to somebody outside the organization. And because there wasn't a good way to handle insider threat, they were able to do whatever they wanted. So financial systems couldn't be accessed, and most significantly, or not most significantly, but very significantly, all of the Cherokee language audio files that had been gathered for over 15 years, everybody's grandparents speaking was lost, and so it was an enormous impact for them. And that's why they ended up paying the ransom. So again, I'm not going to dig too deeply into this because we're kind of talking about zero trust and how we're implementing it. But
Brent, let's take a few moments to have just some other types of interactions.
Yeah.
If anybody has a question, go ahead and raise your hand. Let me start by asking you a question. We have noticed over at the center that the tribal communities and the rural areas, especially within Oregon, are targets. We call them the soft underbelly of the cybersecurity threat. If you deploy tools like Microsoft, and yet you don't have the defaults turned on to protect yourself at the highest levels, and you don't have an MS enterprise support contract, how are you supposed to defend yourself? That's
a very good question, because that is most of the people that I work with on the day-to-day. And the defense contractor that I was working at before I came to Microsoft was a understaffed small DoD contractor in the middle of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where it's impossible to hire talent in. So a really similar case. And there are a couple of things there. One, we do have some fantastic partners that we work with who are able to work with smaller organizations and leverage they're able to leverage several of their key strengths so that they can cut down on costs and deliver that at a really manageable price point for a lot of our smaller tribal customers. But there's also the fact that with the Microsoft platform the way it is currently, because we use so much AI and machine learning to do a lot of the data correlation and give the end administrator, security administrator, pre-curated data points, you don't really need as big of a team. And that's the biggest reason why at my last place, I ended up being a customer of Microsoft, because I was able, with a pretty small shop, we had, by the time I left, I think three or four folk. And we had 2 offices, one in Michigan, one in Florida. And we were able to get a lot of, a lot of requirements rolled out, and we were a researcher for the DoD. So we had a lot of requirements. And we were able to do all of that because the controls in the tools were really straightforward to set up, and they did all the work for us after we, did our initial setup. As far as the skilling and knowledge goes, I would say that the third-party partners were fantastic. I haven't actually worked professionally with the partner that I worked with at my previous job, but my experience so far has been that they were great at bringing us up to speed, helping us check all the boxes, making sure we knew all our blind spots walking in.
So answer me this question. This group of students here are focused on coming in to help, right? They're all educating themselves on cybersecurity. What kind of, especially since Microsoft is in everybody's backyard here, are there opportunities to work with some of these third parties or work in the field somehow so that these students can get some access to data or SOCs like Pisces, or some kind of practical experience to help in the fight of protecting the rural communities and the tribal communities? What would you recommend?
Well, I can tell you that the partners that we do work with, I'm assuming, I haven't talked to them mostly about hiring. I can actually think of one customer who is looking for somebody right now. But these partners, Conquest Cyber is expanding pretty rapidly, and they're setting up new offices down in Oklahoma, and targeting specifically Native communities who need help. So
okay.
There are some, Arctic IT is one that engages a lot in the tribal community space, as well as Planet Technologies. So I would, if anybody were to ask me where should I throw my resume, those would be my top 3 for partner companies.
Could you type those in chat so everybody can pick those up?
Sure.
I always notice that when we go back, we go, well, wait a second, where's the URL? While he's doing that, I wonder if anybody has a question. This is a perfect opportunity to hear your voice so we can get to know you as well. So does anyone have a question? If you do, just put your hand up by clicking on, there we go. Ademola. Tell me how to say your name.
Ademola.
Ademola.
Yes, thank you so much, Ryan. And I'm a student. I'll be graduating in July. Just trying to do my meetup, just trying to see what is going on in the industry and all that. I don't have prior IT background, but I've learned a lot of stuff so far. So I'm just excited to be here listening to Brent Nix talks about all this threat and all that. So my question is, I heard you talking about all this threat and all that. So what exactly let me just use Microsoft as an example, since you work with Microsoft. I've kind of done and established to kind of mitigate all this cyber threat, especially to the end users, which are the consumer, you know, because I know you work with the big companies, they have the facility, they have the, you know, the money to put in infrastructure into place, you know, to mitigate a lot of risk. But the end user, which is the consumer, what are the things Microsoft, like, what are the tools that Microsoft have for those people that don't have that much capability to, you know, go big on infrastructure and some other stuff, tools?
Well, one thing I will say is that you'd be surprised how little the big companies have it down. Just from the get-go. Like pretty recently, a very, very, very large company said, oh, we don't have MMFA in front of our apps and we're going to get in trouble for it. And so they were scrambling. And I was thoroughly surprised, and they're in my account space. So just know that just because the company is big, it could also be the thing that makes it really difficult for them to implement security, because they have so much red tape and so many people who can hit the brakes. You know, it's like having a whole bus of people and everybody has a brake pedal. So when they're trying to get security implemented, even if they have somebody who's really passionate about it and sees what is good with pursuing cybersecurity, you can have a lot of people derail that in an organization very quickly. But with the small organizations, I would say, and we're gonna like, it's kind of like the perfect segue to the next set of slides that I had. But it's really about securing data where it's at and making sure that people in general only have as much access as they need, and they have just-in-time access for critical stuff. And that you're verifying your identity always. So if you do that, and also assume breach, I think that one's so like such a given in my brain after being in this space, I forget to mention it. But always assume breach. You want to make sure that when you're building a system, you're installing hardware, never think of that hardware as fresh. Like think about like the fact that hardware got intercepted on the boat over from whatever country it came from, and somebody planted some electronics in it. How do you deal with that threat? You know?
Oh,
Okay, Brent, well, since you said that was a perfect segue, let's go into your next slide so that you can get through them and they can get the benefit of your wisdom.
Well, all right. So people talk a lot about zero trust. And if you haven't heard about it yet, let me introduce it to you. This idea of zero trust is that we're never going to trust somebody just because of where they're at, or just because of whatever reason. So like previously, when I came into IT, we had this idea that firewalls would save us, right? Like we would be able to create these different networks, and we'd have like, oh, that's that enclave, this is this enclave, and like you just protect the access to that network, and then you'll be fine so long as you know that's protected. The switch here is realizing that if you're always assuming breach, you can never make that assumption. So every time somebody goes to access something like data or an application, they're going to have to verify their identity. So verify identity explicitly is going to be our first guiding principle of zero trust. Use least privilege access. We don't want anybody to have any more access than they need to. And then assume breach. And the ways that we do this, the ways that we can kind of break this out, I've got 6 pillars on this slide. It's the way Microsoft breaks it out. But for a lot of DoD folks, I believe there's like 7 pillars. And then a lot of civilian folks are dealing with 5 pillars, but they're all generally the same thing. So if you look at this one and then you go look at some other zero trust slide and it's a little bit different, don't worry. It's all more or less getting after the same idea. And I'm guessing in the next 10 years, we'll all converge on something that we all agree on, but it takes time. So first we have identity. which I'll jump to. Oh, forgot about this slide. You gotta bring people to the water because they don't necessarily always know how to get there. But we want to focus on these 6 things. We got identity, devices and endpoints, data, applications, infrastructure, and our network. And tying that all together, we have our security policy enforcement, and we're going to make sure that we have some automation in there, because like you talked about before, with the small shop or even with a large IT shop, you're not necessarily going to have the budget to have a SOC. A lot of places don't have the budget to have a SOC. They're either hiring that out to somebody else or not, or just putting their head in the sand. Honestly, if you really dig into, a lot of people are just trying to ignore the problem. So with our identities, this is when you ask like what's the best thing for a small organization, or what do you do first, I like can't stress enough, identity is your first stop shop. Like nothing else will work if you don't secure your identities. And so that comes with a lot of hooks around it. You need to make sure that your identity solution is going to work with all of your applications, with any of your workloads that you need, and that you can rely on it to have strong authentication, and that you're able to verify the identity. You're making sure that you're compliant to any of the requirements that third-party organizations may have. And like I mentioned earlier, the concept of least privilege is really important. You'll see on the slide here, we've got identity provider, MFA, and user session risk as being all part of this bubble. If you're going to take away one thing from this talk, I hope it's MFA is like the most important thing that you can get implemented in any size organization, whether it's like a 20-person, small, like tiny 1-person shop kind of place, or you have a 1,000-person company with a much larger shop. MFA is critical. So from there, we want to look at endpoint. So once we have our identity in place, then we'll be able to authenticate into our devices with that. And we also want to make sure that we're defending our devices. That doesn't just mean having virus protection. One of my teachers, Sam, way back in the day said, virus protection is putting on your pants in the morning. It's like, it's not going to save you from a car accident, but everybody does it. You're not going to leave your house without your pants. So just put them on and be done with it. But since that Sam's course, we've really had a progression in how we do endpoint defense, specifically with this idea of XDR, cross-domain response, where you're able to not just look at the endpoint, but the whole enterprise, and see an incident as it happens through that entire space, and react to it. Not just see it, but react to it. So the data is going to be the biggest one in terms of or like the crown jewels, if you will, for most organizations. There's going to be data that you want to protect. You're also going to want to protect your endpoints, but data seems to be the biggest thing that most people do not want leaving their organization. So if this is health data, we have all these policies surrounding health data or credit card data, but there are things that don't have policies around them that might not get protected, that are critical, like language files, or things that are preservation of culture. And we should really be doing risk assessments about how we store that data, and then making sure that it's encrypted, that it's protected, that people only have a need to access, that it's backed up places that are outside of our use area. We don't want it just being in one geographical location. So there's a bunch of considerations with data that we want to make sure that we're taking care of, because finding out that you no longer have cultural recordings is huge. That's enormous. So applications is going to be a varied lift and shift depending on what your organization looks like going into. Some organizations are going to be already in the cloud, and protecting those applications is going to be a lot easier with modern apps. Modern apps are outsourced apps. They're going to be dynamic. I'd say my personal experience is every organization I go into has a lot of on-premise apps, or if they're not on-premise, old apps that have been pushed up to the cloud that may not be protected super well. And so that's going to be a big challenge for most of you, is my guess. So because where does the data sit, right? Where are we keeping our data and where are we accessing it? Usually through these applications. So big target area, and they end up being a soft spot if we don't have a good solution around them. So you want to make sure that you have a cloud application security broker. We can dig into that more if we have some more questions on it, but essentially what it does is it allows you to build security policies around your application, and also applications that aren't yours, like Box or Dropbox or any like file sharing application. You can, with a good CASB solution, cloud application security broker, you're able to build these rules around what people can do with those apps on your devices, in your network, that sort of thing. And then our infrastructure is that second story that I talked about. Securing your infrastructure is really key, because in a cloud environment, securing your infrastructure means securing your billing account, essentially. And you're going to want to make sure that you're able to have these protections, like just-in-time access and just enough access, so that you don't have a rogue admin or somebody, a malicious actor from outside, who can come in and really wreck your day, wreck your organization. And using machine learning, and I didn't really touch on this in the previous slide, but using machine learning allows us to flag risky behavior, not just from the person. So you can flag risky behavior about the person, about the session, and session, user. There's one more that I'm blanking out on because it's Friday and late. But using machine learning to flag risky behavior allows us to not burden people with so many rules, but catch problems when they arise. So we're using heuristics to say that doesn't look right. That person should not be doing what they're doing. And we can step up our protections around that person. We need you to authenticate again. We need you to video call into your administrator so they can see you, whatever. However you have your system set up, you want to be able to have stepped responses to threats against especially your administration environment. So lastly, we have our network that we need to secure. And I think this one is one that's pretty easy for most people to wrap their heads around, because we've been thinking about firewalls for so long. So if you've ever dealt with a VoIP network and how, or if you've ever dealt with a VoIP network where every phone has its own virtual network, essentially, that's the kind of idea that we want to be going toward with microsegmentation in our networks, where the network only exists to serve exactly what that device needs to do. If it doesn't need to do anything else, why does it have access to the whole network? It should only have access to TinyFlex. So with that, that's kind of a brief overview of Zero Trust. There's a lot more to dig into there, and I can answer any questions that anybody's got about those concepts and kind of what you would do in a larger or smaller organization to get after those.
Brent, that was very educational, and boy, have we come a long way from where cybersecurity was when I was at Microsoft. I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to introduce Dr. Barbara Endicott-Popovsky, because she goes back into the early days of cybersecurity, and she came down to Portland State University to help stimulate some thinking down there based upon her work that she had done both at the University of Washington, Bothell, the University of Washington in Tacoma. Barbara, would you be available for a few words?
Yes, Rand, I really echo your reaction that we've come a long way and there are a lot of new opportunities to protect our networks and our data. I'm really pleased to be here today because Portland State was a major requirement in the requirement's not the right word. The NSA has had a desire to spread the CAE communities across the United States. I think many of you know that the Centers of Academic Excellence are these university-related centers that develop courseware and students and develop grants, offer scholarships, offer students access to jobs. They've really been instrumental. The program started in I think it was 96, with just 7 universities participating, 5 in the Beltway, 2 at the University of Idaho and Idaho State University, and largely in Idaho because of INL and its role with the nuclear power, etc. It's was deemed an appropriate source of employment for people who were studying cybersecurity. And those 7 centers have now grown to what, Rand, about 400, 500?
Yeah, we're nearly at 500 or 400.
And so if you think of the numbers of universities and colleges there are, what is that number, Rand? Is it 4,000, 3,000?
Yeah, well, you're good with the numbers. 4,000 community colleges today.
And how many universities do you remember? My
It's
point,
350, almost 400.
so you can see that there is a growing chunk of these universities and colleges that are becoming involved with the NSA Center of Academic Excellence. And why is that important? Well, if we're thinking about the defense of the country, the protection of our vital data, I was struck by Brent's examples of the results or the implications of a huge data loss. If we think about the value of that data to us, we really do have to start paying attention to how we protect it. And we need to have protections that are end-to-end and transparent. In other words, they could be moved from place to place and people who are trained will know how to use them. So it's not about proprietary software or hardware so much as hardware and software that can be accessible to the people that we're turning out of these universities to man these systems and these SOCs. So the NSA program has grown, and I will have to tell you that they have been concerned about the Northwest for some time. And several years ago, before the pandemic, I was made Johnny Appleseed of the Northwest, if you folks know that myth. I was asked to go around to all of the colleges and universities in the Northwest to evangelize their interest in becoming CAEs. And one of the reasons why the Northwest is so important to the country, this is one segment of the country, one region where industry dominates. And just reflect on what industries we have here that swing the balance of payments. It's pretty amazing. We've got Boeing, we've got Microsoft, we've got Amazon. This has been the center of economic growth and development, entrepreneurship, and so we need to protect it. And I will tell you, having taught for over 20 years in this space, that teaching students to protect systems that are industrial has some different emphasis than fixing or protecting government. I can see it in my curriculum. I can see it in the goals of the systems that we develop to defend our infrastructure. And so I think it's important that we have a voice that we have a presence, that we begin to band together as a unique region in the country. So Portland State was the recipient of a fairly significant 6-state, it's now 7 states, we've added Montana, regional grant, with the idea that we are going to look at the grid, the smart grid, and take steps to protect it. These are initial steps, but we're using the same tools and approach in every state just about. So what this does is it allows us to train students who are flexible, who can move from organization to organization easily, and it allows the industry itself to share insights and ideas and increase protection. And so that's part of the grant. The second part of the grant is addressing education and introducing NSA cleared, the NSA cleared cyber courses that teach a similar vocabulary, similar approaches. Of course, you have to use your own creativity when you're solving problems in cyberspace, but having a common language, having a common set of tools is very helpful to the workforce. They can go from organization to organization and be significantly or equally helpful. And so it's also beneficial to you as students because we're bringing in programs and courses that rely on common language, common concepts, all of which are cleared by NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards. So we've had a number of years where we have been raising the awareness and readiness of our students here in the Northwest. So I think it's significant that Portland State was selected to be the center of this universe that we're creating regionally. And it gives students an opportunity to be on the ground floor of what's developing here in the Northwest. So I'm happy to be here, happy to hear Brent's comments about Native American protections in a couple of cases. I think you may be aware that the state of Oregon has the largest concentration of Native Americans in the country. There's 9 formal tribes here, and we want to make sure that they have equal opportunity to education and knowledge that we can bring to bear. Certainly these tribal areas have a significance to the country. They're part of the United States of America, and they really do want to we really want to make sure that the people who live and work there are protected, their data, their computers, etc. Does anyone have any questions about what our goals are in the Northwest or how you could participate? Rand?
Yeah, I'm looking to see if any hands have come up. It's important to always offer some silence when people are trying to bring their bravery up to ask a question out loud. But you have access to 3 very, very high-level resources. Nick.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So like, is being a half breed myself, I'm half Native American. What are like the key components that you guys are actually doing to actually help secure like the different tribal the different tribes infrastructures and like their data on like a day-to-day basis?
I would
Or like
defer.
how? Oh, go ahead.
I would defer to Brent on that. Brent, your thoughts?
What are we doing on a day-to-day basis? So this is where I think I would really like to see more action from more tech companies. And something, so we have an organization within Microsoft called Indigenous at Microsoft. So that's one thing, is that a lot of companies are building out these groups within the companies. I know I saw that at ACES. we had we had a circle for veterans in one of the rooms at ACES this last year. And we had representation from all the different tech companies. And one of the things that we did at the beginning of the discussion was we talked about opportunities that we were offering from our different companies and like what we're doing for natives. And I think currently the answer is not enough for communities. Like we're saying a lot, you know, we're trying to do a lot of land acknowledgements and get local communities involved in new design initiatives as buildings are built. And I'm speaking broadly across like all the tech leaders that I just what I've seen, but like not as much actually investing time in communities and educating like up and coming like kids and things like that in STEM. I would love to see more of that, and also investing more in infrastructure. I know it happens, just not enough yet.
So is part of that issue just like the lack of financial resources on like, because I know a lot of tribes are financially strapped for money and stuff like that. So is that part of the issue is they don't have the upfront cost to like to even pay for like a security infrastructure?
I think it depends on how you cut it. So far in the tribal space, because I think there's stereotypes that are playing into that like idea. Tribes do have money, and it depends on the tribe, right? But tribes do have money, and sometimes they have more money than they're able to get trustworthy people in to actually implement these things. And also they're having to deal with the fact that the cloud is something new and pretty scary, and you're gonna have to walk your elders through like the different risks involved, and like that's all a whole process. And I think for a lot of different communities is the speed of acquisition of security tools is complicated. Like it's just like there's a lot of elements at play, and you know they're all there for a good reason. Like I have it doesn't surprise me at all that we're going to have elders who are very resistant to going to the cloud because like data sovereignty is a real issue. So if we solve the data sovereignty problem, which at Microsoft we are treating, you know, when tribes come and say we want data sovereignty on our data in the cloud, we're treating them as like a country, a state coming in, and there are tools like Lockbox that make it so that nobody that they're not giving access to their data can get access to their data, period. So there's a lot of different pieces to what makes adoption possible for a tribe, but money is a barrier to entry for certain tribes. And I think it mostly comes down to being creative on writing grants or writing applications for grants, or working with what resources, you know, are available. And plus some of the partners, like I'd mentioned, Conquest Cyber has been really forward on trying to use their big accounts to fund their small accounts, if you get what I'm saying. Like they'll charge the big government organizations a little bit more and not charge the very small government organizations as much, because they're just not able to handle as much for the same kinds of services.
So
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I wanted to mention another opportunity for some of these discussions is the ACES National Conference. That's where Brent and I actually met last fall, and how we connected to be able to have today's talk is the ACES, American Indian Science and Engineering Society. Brent and I are both members. I'm the one of only 2 engineering department chairs in the country with a tribal affiliation. I'm a tribe member from the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi from back in Michigan, where Brent's from. And so the tribes all over the country are dealing with similar issues, and every one of them comes from a different spot, a different place in terms of financial resources. And in some cases, they're able to leverage the sophistication on the gambling side, that they know that the gambling infrastructures are targets, and so they've had to harden those, and those experiences may sometimes help the normal tribal government side incorporate best practices. But just seeing the challenges, my tribe went to Microsoft Teams for all of our meetings. Suddenly remote people like myself can participate much better. But to this day, I still go on the website. They don't list email addresses for anyone. They list phone numbers, both on the website and on the newsletter. And it's like, it's hard to move along into the current time.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to jump in here and say that this is entree to our meeting, Tim. PSU is in a position to lead the way on educating Native Americans. And we have some thoughts about how we might do that cost effectively and to the benefits of students, but it will become, and we've had clearance from the provost, this is a big thrust that's going to be developing at PSU, and you're going to be a part of it, Tim.
Yeah.
And these students that have expressed interest, we've got to attract students to this field. And I must tell you that you met Sean Chung, my Native American student who won the ACES scholarship way back when. It saved his college career. And then he went on to a special scholarship with the federal government. A very bright student, loved computers. He is now doing so well, I can't even begin to tell you. And Tim knows the story. But to make it brief, the boy grew up in abject poverty, no dad, his other brothers in prison. They had a meth business in the family. And this boy broke out, and he ends up making huge money. Not that money's everything, but it enabled him to help his mother to reach back and give her money and to bring his sweetheart here, whom he married. He is my favorite success story. He's now working at the Boeing company. Prior to that, he'd been a consultant at Mitre Corp, making about $250,000 a year. As I said, money isn't everything, but in his case, he used it to great effect, and he's changed many lives. I'm going to have him available to us to mentor anyone that has interest. And this is becoming a big, big thrust of our center. So I thought I'd just share that, Tim.
You guys can see from what I put in chat that we have a plan that is starting to emerge at PSU. The first one is this is to Nick's question, is what can we do? Is start with awareness training from you to them. As you take these courses, you guys get out and look for speaking opportunities to bring awareness to people. Then the classes are starting to think about teaching students how to do assessments for the organizations. And I put in a document called 800-30 that's used to show people how to do assessments. And then you heard me ask Brent about apprenticeships and third-party organizations. And then there's a cybersecurity resiliency certificate that Margaret Banyan teaches that's teaching the individuals from the tribes, from the public organizations within Oregon, small business owners. And those are another opportunity of people to go interact with. Chip, you have your hand up so long, it must be hurting underneath your arm.
Okay.
No, we'll probably run out of time, but the real quick question was, this has been a great presentation, lots of fun stuff. It's distinctly from the Microsoft point of view. There are other operating systems, some of which are by design more secure. Do you have any thoughts on those?
So I came from a Linux admin background. I'm like, I have developed like all my software on Linux and Mac over the years, and I have a Mac that I use when I travel for work with my Microsoft stickers on it. I'm pretty hardware agnostic at this point. I think if you've grown up in IT, it's hard not to be, because like I've sat down in front of every computer available and just worked, So I will say that I am really impressed with the amount of money that Microsoft is throwing right now at cross-platform protection. The fact that we're doing Defender for endpoint on Mac, Linux, and the development efforts are like, every time I check, there's more features that are being solidified. It's like constant. Every time a customer asks me a question, I have to correct myself, because like I'll be like, I know we can't do that yet, and oh, wait a second, no, it's working now. The roadmap that they're pursuing is very aggressive, and there are a lot of acquisitions that are helping pull into that. So I would say at this point in history, if I were to get religious about which cloud or which piece of hardware is a battle I don't really want to fight. Like I just want to have my data secure where it's at, whether it's in anybody's cloud or anybody's hardware. Just want to make sure that we can secure it.
Well, I think that's pretty awesome. I didn't think that anybody would ever ask somebody from Microsoft if they think that they should be using Linux or the Mac, but it is a really good question. I could similarly ask AWS or Azure, but I already know the answer. Office 365
like
online.
I talked to friends who, like, I practiced Kung Fu with a guy who works at Amazon, and they use our stack for all their office stuff. So like, I mean, it is what it is.
We shouldn't even be looking at products anymore. We should be looking at organizational missions, how we can achieve the goals of our customers, and how to take away all this craziness.
Yeah.
If anybody doesn't have any questions, I think this might take us through the end of Friday, which probably all of you are hoping it happens fast. I sure am. I'll leave the opportunity for Tim to close it out. And I want to thank all of you for listening to Brent and to Barbara and to me today. Thank you very much, Tim. This was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you,
Tim,
everybody.
you're going to have to turn on your microphone, though.
Yep.
That's a requirement.
Thank you, Rand. Thank you, Brent. And thank you, Barbara. So this was a really interesting, enlightening talk.